Bonjour tout le monde.
Hello, everyone.
Today I have the pleasure of being in the wonderful company of Dr. Tam, who is Chief Public Health Officer of Canada, Dr. Nu, who is Deputy Chief Public Health Officer of Canada, also in the wonderful virtual company of Minister Anita Anand, who is Minister of Public Services and Procurement, as well as in the company of Minister Navdeep Bains, who is Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry. Dr. Tam, please.
Good afternoon, bon après-midi. I'd like to make a few observations today on what we're learning about the long game in the control of COVID-19. But first, here are the latest numbers for COVID-19 in Canada. There have been 101,337 cases, including 8,430 deaths. 63% of the cases have now recovered. Labs across Canada have tested over 2,415,000 people for COVID-19 to date. Over the past week, an average of 38,000 people were tested daily, with 1% testing positive. These numbers change quickly, and you can get the updates in the evenings on canada.ca/coronavirus. For weeks, we've been looking at our collective progress to slow epidemic growth and get COVID-19 under control. We've still got a few hot spots in Canada, and we've seen more than one new flare-up to remind us that COVID-19 has not gone away. The marathon continues. I wish I could say we were close to the finish line or even halfway, but that simply isn't the case, and no one can say for sure how far off we are. We've got a very clear motivation to keep going, and there is absolute certainty that giving up is not an option. We've got to work together to get through this. All along the way, we've had countries ahead of and beside us in this marathon, or are doing similar things, but with different degrees of success. Contrasts, both within Canada as well as globally, are teaching us many things about COVID-19 epidemic control. Globally, there are now over 9 million cases, with an average of almost 150,000 new cases being reported every day over the past 7 days. And if we think those cases aren't close to home, think again. Almost 60% of these new cases are being reported from the Americas. Summer hasn't made COVID-19 go away. Populations around the world are still highly susceptible, and epidemics can be reignited anywhere at any time. That doesn't mean we don't control our own future here in Canada. On the contrary, with COVID-19 around us, we can't have a reopening that doesn't include all of us working together to keep our guard up and keep the curve down. This is the long game. The first rule is to be aware of the risks of exposure and to make informed decisions, taking necessary precautions to keep you and your loved ones safe. Those precautions include keeping the 2 meters of physical distancing, layering with a non-medical mask or face covering, and staying home when sick. And now that spaces are reopening, we need to avoid or strictly limit our time in settings and situations that increase our risk of exposure to the virus, like closed spaces with poor ventilation, crowded places with large numbers of people gathered, and close contacts where you can't keep the 2 meters apart from others. Thank you. Merci.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tam. Dr. Nu? Thank you. Good afternoon. I'd like to make a few observations today on what we're learning about the long game in the control of COVID-19. But first, here are the latest numbers for COVID-19 in Canada. There have been 101,337 cases, including 8,430 deaths. 63% of the cases have now recovered. Labs across Canada have tested over 2,415,000 people for COVID-19 to date. Over the past week, an average of 38,000 people were tested daily, with 1% testing positive. These numbers change quickly and are updated daily in the evenings on canada.ca/coronavirus. For weeks, we've been looking at our collective progress to slow epidemic growth and get COVID-19 under control. We've still got a few hotspots in Canada, and we've seen more than one new flare-up to remind us that COVID-19 has not gone away. The marathon continues. I wish we could say that we were close to the finish line or even halfway, but that simply isn't the case. And no one can say for sure how far off we are. We've got a very clear motivation to keep going, and there is absolute certainty that giving up is not an option. We've got to work together to get through this. All along the way, we've had countries ahead of us and beside us in this marathon. All are doing similar things, but with different degrees of success. Contrasts, both within Canada as well as globally, are teaching us many things about COVID-19 epidemic control. Globally, there are now over 9 million cases, with an average of almost 150,000 new cases being reported every day over the past 7 days. And if we think these cases aren't close to home, think again. Almost 60% of the new cases are being reported from the Americas. Summer hasn't made COVID-19 go away. Populations around the world are still highly susceptible, and epidemics can be reignited anywhere at any time. It doesn't mean we don't control our own future here in Canada. On the contrary. With COVID-19 around us, we can't have a reopening that doesn't include all of us working together to keep our guard up and keep the curve down. This is the long game. The first rule is to be aware of risks of exposure and to make informed decisions, taking necessary precautions to keep you and your loved ones safe. Those precautions include our Team Canada public health rules, keeping 2 meters of physical distancing, washing hands often, covering your nose and your mouth when coughing or sneezing, wearing a non-medical mask or face covering, and staying home when sick. Now that spaces are reopening, public spaces are reopening, we need to avoid or strictly limit our time in settings and situations that increase our risk of exposure to virus, like closed spaces with poor ventilation, crowded places with large number of people gathered, and close contact where you can't keep 2 meters apart from others. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. New. I would like to now give the floor to Minister Anita Anand.
Anita.
Thank you so much, Jean-Yves. Bonjour tout le monde. Hello.
Hello, everyone.
It has been more than 100 days since the COVID-19 pandemic struck Canada and changed daily life in this country as we know it. Since the beginning, our government has been vigilant in ramping up procurement and distribution of vital equipment needed to fight the virus, supplementing the procurements of provinces and territories. Aujourd'hui, nous nous trouvons dans une...
Today, we find ourselves in a different situation. Canadians are doing their part to flatten the curve, and we are laying the foundation for an economic recovery. With the virus still ravaging in many parts of the world, our progress to date could not have been possible without a truly committed nationwide effort.
Although the number of COVID-19 cases continues to decline across the country, we cannot be sure that the danger has passed, as Dr. New just suggested. We must be prepared for a potential second wave of the virus. And that is why my department continues to adhere to a two-pronged contractual approach of buying aggressively in highly competitive global markets, while at the same time diversifying our supply chains, including in terms of domestic production. Now for an update on international shipments. This week, an additional 9 cargo planes chartered by Canada brought home much-needed supplies, such as gloves, gowns, and masks. This brings our total to 78 plane loads of supplies received to date. We also welcomed our 13th shipment of hand sanitizer at the Port of Vancouver, and we continue to receive about 500,000 N95 respirator masks from 3M in the United States on a monthly basis. This is in addition to the larger order that 3M is delivering directly to provincial and territorial health care systems. Les entreprises canadiennes maintenant, en plus
Canadian businesses now. Coupled with our international shipments, Canadian companies continue to deliver, helping Canada's pandemic response while sustaining and creating jobs across the country. Companies led by traditionally underrepresented groups are very much a part of our response to COVID-19, stepping up to supply the country with goods.
The Spirit Healthcare Group of Indigenous-led companies in Manitoba is an excellent illustration. In early March, Spirit Healthcare sourced and then delivered essential PPE for Manitoba's First Nations. The group's pharmacy and medical supply company, Spirit RX, then ramped up delivery of PPE to meet both provincial and territorial and federal requests. Spirit RX provided 1 million isolation gowns for the province of Manitoba and provided the federal government with more than 656 digital thermometers. We must and will continue to engage with Indigenous-led businesses. This objective is precisely the intention behind our recent request for proposals aimed at specifically Indigenous businesses for the provision of 25 million non-medical masks. That request for a proposal closes today. The response has been encouraging, and we will have more to say on new contracts in the coming weeks. Maintenant, les livraisons. Les fournisseurs livrent.
Now deliveries. Suppliers are delivering on all fronts, and Canadian companies are playing an imperative role in our efforts to secure the most vital personal protective equipment. We have now received more than 205 million units of various personal protective equipment. That includes millions of gowns, face shields, gloves, surgical masks, and N95 respirators, with many of those being produced right here at home by Canadian manufacturers.
And now for our weekly PPE update. Gowns. To date, we have received a total of 4.9 million gowns, with about half of them made in Canada. Face shields. We have also received a total of nearly 18 million face shields, and the vast majority of these are made right here at home. Hand sanitizer. We now have more than 7 million liters of hand sanitizer, and most of it was made right here in Canada as well. Masks and N95 respirators. We also have nearly 111 million surgical masks delivered, with more on the way, and we continue to receive shipments of much sought after N95 respirators. In the coming weeks, these deliveries will include Canadian-made N95s as part of our 10-year agreement with Medicom to manufacture and deliver on a monthly basis. We will be prepared for any eventuality. To date, our government has distributed some 3.5 million N95s and equivalent masks across the country. This week, I'm also pleased to report that after receiving Health Canada certification, CAE is set to start shipping Made in Canada ventilators every week to the Government of Canada. That company, based in Montreal and primarily focused on civil aviation and defense, was able to retool, recalling its employees from temporary layoff after being awarded a contract for the production of ventilators. Now it joins other Canadian manufacturers, such as Thornhill Medical, that are providing us with these life-saving Canadian-made machines. Now for an announcement. From the significant deliveries of PPE that Canada has received, it is clear that we have succeeded in securing contracts with a wide range of suppliers. As we move into the next phase of our response to the crisis, we are returning to the use of competitive processes where circumstances permit, the longer timelines required to conduct a competition. I'm happy to announce that this week, after publicly soliciting proposals from Canadian suppliers, we have signed 4 contracts for cloth face masks. One of these contracts includes an agreement with Westport Manufacturing, which will be making these masks in its plants in Vancouver and Mississauga. Westport is another example of Canadian companies meeting the challenge of our time. After nearly 75 years of producing custom drapes and beddings, the company is pivoting its business to align with the demand for PPE at present in this country. In so doing, it is not only providing Canada with domestically manufactured masks, but also maintaining jobs in 2 Canadian cities. In closing, Canadians should know that as we move forward into the next phases of the pandemic and face a potential second wave, the Government of Canada is prepared. We are working with other levels of government and our industry partners to ensure that frontline workers have access to PPE needed to fight the pandemic. Global demand for PPE and medical supplies will continue to go up, and as it does, Canada will continue to keep up. Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
Merci, Anita. Et
Thank you, Anita. I'll ask Navdeep to speak now.
Thank you very much, Jean-Yves. And as we've been doing on a weekly basis, I'd like to share an update on our efforts to put into place a secure domestic supply of key personal protective equipment for our frontline healthcare workers. We're bringing together Canadian ingenuity and expertise to come up with homegrown solutions to the challenges that we are facing today. To date, over 6,400 Canadian firms have offered their expertise and capacity to retooling, scaling up, providing urgently needed goods and services. And I cannot say enough of how proud I am of our incredible Canadian innovative businesses and the work that they're doing during this challenging time. A few weeks ago, we put out a call under the Innovative Solutions Canada program, and this time through the prototype stream, where departments right across government can test existing prototypes for both medical and non-medical solutions. And we've asked for creative made-in-Canada technologies to address the COVID-19 pandemic and similar public health emergencies. And the response has been absolutely outstanding. En seulement 2 semaines, nous avons reçu plus de 500.
In just 2 weeks, we received over 550 proposals from innovators across the country.
Is Lind Equipment, based in Markham, Ontario, to which we have now awarded a contract under the Innovative Solutions Canada prototype testing stream. They're developing a UV sanitizer innovation called Apollo Light, using lead-generated UVC light capable of decontaminating work areas and surfaces, and can potentially enable us to reuse personal protective equipment. There is promising science that indicates that UVC light can inactivate bacteria and viruses, including coronaviruses like SARS. And to move the project forward, we will be piloting the Apollo Light in certain office and workspaces in Global Affairs Canada's head office in Ottawa. Nous allons mettre à l'essai l'Apollo Light dans 2 lieux de travail.
We will be piloting Apollo Light in 2 workplaces, Global Affairs Canada headquarters in Ottawa.
Such as trains, buses, police, ambulance, and fire trucks. The next generation manufacturing supercluster has also selected several projects to support the fight against COVID-19. Le premier projet est celui de Hexacad, Bois-Brun, au Québec.
The first one is Hexacad from Bois-Brun, Quebec, which will build molds that will be used to produce the plastic consumables for testing.
is a project led by Cloud Diagnostics based in Kitchener. They make wrist cuffs that can remotely monitor a patient's pulse and other symptoms. And this technology can free up much needed hospital beds by sending non-urgent patients home while still being able to monitor how they're doing on a daily basis. Last is Myant. It's out of Etobicoke, and it's producing a new textile-based monitoring system for patients and frontline healthcare workers. Their smart garment technology has the ability to read and collect biometrics from the user's body via sensors, which are then analyzed by Myant's AI platform to essentially identify signs of health issues. And these initiatives add to the overall 37 COVID-19 response projects announced to date by our digital technology, next generation technology, and scale AI superclusters. I'd just like to close today by saying to everyone that has been contributing to our efforts over the past few months, and I'm talking about our researchers, our entrepreneurs, our businesses, both large and small, we are sincerely grateful for your efforts. And today's announcements are further proof of your commitment to Canadians. And I know we share the goals of protecting Canadians now as we look to gradually reopening up the economy. So it's so heartening to see so many Canadians pulling together to achieve these goals. Once again, thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much, Navdeep, and we would all be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Minister. So as usual, we're going to start with 3 questions on the phone before we turn to the room. 1 question, 1 follow-up. Operator, over to you.
Thank you. Merci. Our first question, notre première question, nous vient Micheline Laflamme avec Radio-Canada. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Question from Radio-Canada. Question. Mr. Duclos, I'd like to talk about the letter that lawyer Brian Greenspan wrote to the Minister of Justice concerning the imprisonment of the 2 Michaels in China. You have Louise Arbour and Alan Rock, 2 lawyers, one a former cabinet minister, saying that the government does not need to carry out extradition measures. It could already decide not to extradite, and that this could lead to the freeing of the 2 Michaels.
Merci.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. I think there are technical problems. There are 2 very important things. We are very worried. The service will be interrupted briefly.
Ces 2 Michael vivent depuis trop longtemps maintenant en Chine pour toutes sortes de raisons. La situation extraordinairement injuste qu'ils vivent de par exemple, leur incapacité d'avoir
their inability to have consular services, which is completely against international agreements. We're angry. We're worried about this situation. We think it's unfair the way China has been treating these prisoners. In Canada, we function on the basis of integrity and upholding the justice system. That is why yesterday Mr. Trudeau reminded us that we will continue to work based on the independence of the judiciary system in Canada. That is not only the strength of our country and our institutions, but this allows us to maintain Canada's reputation beyond our borders.
Micheline, juste un petit instant. Monsieur Duclos, si vous pouviez répéter.
Mr. Duclos, could you please repeat your answer in English?
Things in this very unfortunate situation. The first thing is that we are very preoccupied and saddened and angered by the current situation which is affecting the 2 Michaels. We find it very unfortunate unfair and counterproductive for China to treat the two Michaels in that particular manner. There are all sorts of things that we don't understand, including the fact that they don't have access to consular services, which is an absolute obligation under international treaties. So we are making that well understood and well felt by the Chinese government. At the same time, we in Canada are used to and proud of the independence and the integrity and the respect for our judicial system, and will continue to do that, because not only is it important for Canadians and Canadian institutions to function and to prosper, but it's also important for the reputation of Canada outside of its frontiers, and it's particular for the ability of Canada to draw the support that it has drawn from in the last few days in telling China that Canadians, Canada, and many other countries across the world find this situation totally unacceptable.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre. Micheline, en suivi?
Follow-up question. According to Mr. Greenspan, Ms. Louise Arbour, former judge of the Canadian Supreme Court, I don't need to describe her to you, they say that the minister has the authority. Would this not be the time to have a debate on how far we can go? Answer: we're in a free society where people have the right to express their opinion. This is not only allowable, permitted, but it is desirable that everyone be allowed to express their opinion. And the Prime Minister Trudeau said yesterday that we will follow appropriate methods in Canada that allow us to uphold the integrity of and the reputation of the justice system, not only in our own country, but as we are seen abroad.
Thank you. Merci. Our next question. Notre prochaine question nous vient de Jordan Press with the Canadian Press. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Good afternoon. My first question is for Minister Anand. Can you just explain, in moving back to this competitive bid process, where is going to be the line between what supplies are going to be subject to that bid process, or that competitive process, and which supplies are not going to be part of that because they're deemed more essential than others?
Anita, we don't hear you. You might want to turn your microphone.
Yes, it's on. Thank you so much for the question. There is not one single firm line between the decision to move to competitive bid processes versus sole sourcing. The decision regarding sole sourcing has been made under our emergency authorities, given the crisis that we are in and the urgent need to source PPE and other items. And that urgency, in light of global demand and the fragility of international supply chains, continues to exist. Where possible, we are moving to competitive bid processes as a means to supplement our current supply chains. And as I have said repeatedly, our strategy is to have multiple supply chains operating in tandem so that we are able to procure PPE from diverse sources. And so the competitive bid process is a supplement to our current procurements. And as we have more stability in global supply chains for masks, gowns, gloves, and the like, we will be moving to competitive processes.
Jordan, follow up?
Thank you for that. As a follow-up, actually, I'd like to ask Dr. Tam a question, and I'm sorry to throw a change up here to you, Doctor, but I'd like to ask about the Toronto Blue Jays. They are supposed to start training as soon as, I believe it's July 1st, under the Major League Baseball's proposal that was unveiled yesterday. And I'm just curious, given some of the proposals that we've had with the NHL, can you just talk about whether the Blue Jays would actually be able to train in Toronto without the 14-day quarantine period? And if so, do you foresee any way for actually Major League Baseball games to be played in Toronto this year, considering the visiting teams would all be coming from the United States?
So I think we've had discussions with essentially all the key professional international leagues, and including Major League Baseball. And I think it's predicated, of course, on an actual mitigation plan that ensures the safety of Canadians and, of course, for the league itself, the safety of its players. So I think similarly with the NHL, those plans have to be essentially supported by local and provincial public health authorities. When players come into, let's say it's a bit like coming back to work in Toronto, where you come back to training, they are subjected to 14 days of quarantine. As the way that I understand it anyways, so individual training, etc. in Toronto if you're first coming in. But as the teams coalesce and come together, there are the concepts of cohorting or group quarantine, whereby the players have to remain together and, of course, pose no risk to themselves or the surrounding population. So that's the concept. Again, everything has to be reviewed. That there's a strict sort of testing and screening and isolation and quarantine requirements, and so routine testing is part of the sort of mitigation plan. But all of that has to be evaluated in real time as well. And the local health authorities have to be comfortable with being engaged on what will happen if, say, there is a player that is tested positive. So that requires the local public health support for those protocols.
Thank you, Dr. Tam. Operator, next question, please.
Thank you. Merci. Our next question, notre prochaine question is from Michel Lamarche avec TVA. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Question from TVA. Hello, this question is for Mr. Duclos. Mr. Duclos, I would like to hear you talk about the most recent figures from the Parliamentary Budget Officer, who assessed the cost of extending the CERB. He spoke of approximately $18 billion more in expenses. Did this surprise you? I'd also like to know if you're disappointed to see that the wage subsidy is not getting much pickup. It's not as important as popular as you had hoped, rather. Answer. The first thing that I'll say is that we're always very happy with the work of the Parliamentary Budget Officer, who has not only the ability but the obligation to provide the government and Canadians with the information they can provide. As the Parliamentary Budget Officer himself said, this information may be erroneous. We'll have to wait and see what happens in the coming weeks. We received this information then, and as we know, this information will be used by the Minister of Finance, who himself, on July 8th, will table an economic snapshot of the Canadian government's fiscal situation. Now, in other words, the costs are estimated, but they are not very accurate. This estimate is not very accurate and could be subject to error. In the coming days, we'll have separate estimates published by the Government of Canada on CERB, and we'll be able to compare our own figures with those of the Parliamentary Budget Officer. As for the wage subsidy, we're seeing that it's slowly becoming more popular. It's a new program, not just for the government, but for businesses. The impact of this subsidy is growing. The Minister of Finance has announced an extension until August 29th and has also announced that this wage subsidy will become more and more important. Follow-up question. I'd like to hear you on the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation statistics, which were published earlier today. Among others, there has been considerable setback in construction projects in Montreal for the year 2020. There may be a rebound after, but do you have major concerns when you look at these figures? Do you have major concerns about the real estate market? Do these forecasts and data worry you? Answer: I'm actually quite confident. I am particularly confident in the work of the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation. The two keywords here are confinement and then confidence. Confinement in Quebec and in Montreal in particular hurt the economy. It was necessary for health reasons. And it included the confinement of the construction industry in the beginning. Understandably, the construction industry has had some delays. I am, however, very confident about the situation in Quebec and in Montreal in particular. Montreal had a very, very good economic situation. We have almost full employment across Quebec, and the strength of the Quebec economy is excellent. And in Quebec in particular, we have strengths, innovation, for example, investing in new technology, investing in infrastructure, particularly in the region of Quebec City. I'm very confident then that as the CMHC suggests, the market will rebound very quickly.
We've seen a considerable rise in coronavirus cases in the United States, and as you said, Dr. Tam, a lot of the infections we're seeing are in the Americas. So is the government considering any more testing, tracing, or any additional measures for people who are allowed to cross the border? You know, I'm thinking about truckers, people en route to Alaska, that kind of thing.
So right now, the key, there's a series of measures, of course, that are applied to persons traveling to Canada. And you've heard some of these from Transport Canada in terms of for flights, for example, screening ahead of the flight, temperature check, arrival, screening questions, and the mandatory 14-day quarantine with sort of certain exemptions. And people who are truck drivers are providing essential services, so they're not asked to be mandated for 14 days of isolation or quarantine, but they are asked to stick to the intent of the quarantine measures, which is don't come in contact with, physical distancing, mask wearing if you're not able to keep that distance, etc. So at the moment, testing is not part of the border measures, given some of the characteristics of the tests. Immunity, for example, is not yet well characterized, for example. So relying on antibody testing at this time is not being entertained until we've got more information about human immunology and the performance of the serologic testing. That's the antibody testing. Testing for the virus itself through PCR testing, that's a different test, can only ascertain whether someone is infected at that moment in time, and even during the course of illness, they may test negative, even if they're infected for the initial period of the incubation period. So there are limitations, of course, to lab testing. But we're continuing to evaluate the performance and look at all different possibilities of adding more and more layers of measures if we are to increase traffic across Canada. So I think we're continuously evaluating, but at this point in time, that is not part of our measure.
Okay, thank you. And I also just want to ask you about what is the evidence? Maybe you could explain to us the evidence that you're using to recommend that people stay 2 meters apart? And do you think that provinces and territories should consider reducing that recommended distance to maybe 1 meter? We're seeing other countries do that.
So, there are different sort of recommendations by different countries. We see the suite of recommendations, the core public health measures for members of the public, as very much layers of protection. So, and the 2 meter distance is based on the usual sort of way droplets that are emitted from people if they're coughing or sneezing, etc., fall to the ground or fall on top of someone else. And so, you may catch the majority of droplets within 1 meter, but there are droplets that are going to fall between 1 to 2 meters. So what you're looking at is layers of precaution. And if you can't keep the 2 meters, we recommend the masks, etc. Always wash your hands. Don't go out and intermingle if you're sick. All of those still has to apply, but there are layers of protection under certain circumstances. Maybe people can't keep the exact 2 meter distance, but we absolutely recommend that all of those layers of protection are provided. But I know that provinces have to adjust to certain realities of maintaining the distance. But that's the bottom line is that, 1 meter catches a whole bunch of droplets, 2 meters, there will be more droplets that you may be able to avoid if you kept the 2 meter distance. So that's the basis of the recommendations. And again, we'll undergo continuous discussion with the chief medical officers around Canada. But at the last discussion, which was only last week, we agreed that 2 meters is what we want to recommend for Canadians.
Thank you, Dr. Tam. Kelsey.
Thank you. My questions are for Minister Baines. 2 years ago, you announced a fast-track visa program aimed at luring high-skilled workers to Canada called the Global Talent Stream. Yesterday, President Trump said that he was temporarily blocking visas for such highly skilled foreign workers. And today, the CEO of Shopify has already issued an invitation on Twitter for high-skilled engineers and that to consider working in Canada. So I'm wondering, how much of an opportunity is President Trump's decision to temporarily block these visas for Canada? And are you planning on expanding or extending the Global Talent Stream program in light of the changes announced by Washington?
Well, thank you very much for your question. You're absolutely correct in your assessment, which is we as a government launched this global skills strategy to attract top-tier global talent. We've seen in the past that every visa that we've issued, it's also helped create Canadian jobs. Roughly 10 Canadian jobs are created for every visa that was issued. So this helped with the expansion of our economy. This helped so many businesses, small and large, businesses grow and scale up. And so this has been a very positive development for our economy. And we fundamentally believe in immigration, progressive immigration policies. We believe that if we have strong immigration policies coupled with strong domestic policies around lifelong learning, that we equip Canadians to succeed, to get better outcomes, better jobs, and better opportunities moving forward. We're very mindful that we need to focus on our strategies. We know different countries, the U.S., as you highlighted, will pursue their own paths when it comes to immigration. But we fundamentally believe that we're in a unique position to attract top-tier talent. We've seen an increase in the number of international students as well in our academic institutions. And so overall, we're going to continue down that path. With regards to the Global Skills Strategy program that you mentioned, that is a permanent feature. That is something that was a pilot project that we launched a few years ago, and now it's a permanent part of our immigration policy. And I look forward to working with my colleague, Marco Mendicino, to see what further changes we can bring about to attract top-tier global talent here to Canada, which will help create Canadian jobs and create economic growth here in Canada.
So given Canada's unique position and the latest changes announced by Washington, then, is Canada planning on doing a campaign to attract this talent to Canada, given this possibility?
Again, I underscore one key component of our industrial policy called the Innovation and Skills Plan. We know now that even if the investments that we're making, for example, in the Made in Canada project, are really predicated on investing in people, investing in their ideas. And we recognize that immigration is going to be a critical component of generating those ideas, because when new people come here, they come here to succeed. They come here to do better. And that creates opportunities for us here in Canada, as I said. And so I think there's tremendous opportunities for us to reevaluate our immigration policies and continue to build on the successes of the past. And I look forward to working with my colleague to examine the opportunities that we have, because we want to move forward with a strong recovery for the economy. And we know immigration is going to be front and center for that.
Thank you, Minister. Molly?
Hi, Doctors and Ministers. Molly Thomas, CTV National News. Minister Duclos, is Canada bracing for a 10% tariff on aluminum products to the U.S.? And can you help us understand what you're hearing from the U.S. counterparts on this subject?
Thank you very much for that question. And I would first start with two brief remarks. The first one is that we will always defend the interest of the 11,000 aluminum workers that we have the chance of having across Canada, working very hard in a very competitive industry. The second thing is that Minister Freeland is on top of this file. She has advocated, as we all know, very hard and very well over the last years, advocated the interest of those workers with our American neighbor. What I would also add is that a bit more than a year ago, on the 17th of May 2019, the U.S. administration agreed to lift the unfair and illegal tariffs on aluminum that had been imposed under their Section 232. Now, with that came a commitment by the Canadian government to put into place better regulations and better monitoring rules and resources to ensure that aluminum would not be dumped into Canada. That was put into effect on the 1st of September 2019. And since then, we have not only respected our commitment, but have indeed, with our business partners, made sure that those regulations and that those resources would be there to protect against aluminum dumped from abroad. Now, I will also add that in a few days from now, on July the 1st, the new NAFTA will enter into force, which reinforces even more the interest of Canada and the United States to work together, because under that agreement, there is a minimum of 70% of aluminum that must be used within North America to produce, to be used in the automotive industry. And that also means that the use and the production of aluminum in Canada is no harm and no threat to our American friends and neighbors. It's in fact the free flow of aluminum across our border is a mutual benefit to both countries and workers in both countries. It makes our businesses more competitive, in particular in the automobile industry. It also reduces costs to consumers. When we have a more competitive industry, it's also good for consumers. And I would also add that strategic reasons make it very important for that flow of aluminum to be managed appropriately. Much of our aluminum is provided to critical industries in the U.S., including the defense and the aerospace industry, and that's one more reason to let our American friends and neighbors understand that we need to keep working together to ensure that this stays as it has done in the last few months in a collaborative and efficient manner.
En français, s'il vous plaît, Monsieur le Ministre.
In French, please. Answer being repeated in French. First of all, I'd like to say that the Canadian government will always defend the rights of the interests of the 11,000 aluminum workers across the country. They're not only north of my own riding in Saguenay, in Quebec. These workers work very hard every day in a very competitive sector important for our economy. I'd also like to say that Minister Freeland worked very, very hard and very well in the last few years on this file. She is continuing to do so. I should add that the agreement signed May 17th, 2019 is an agreement that eliminated the unfair, illegal tariffs imposed on aluminum by the U.S. Administration. It required Canada to put better regulations in place. And the Canadian Border Services Agency in particular would have to work hard to ensure that there was no dumping of aluminum from abroad. These rules were put in effect as of September 1st, 2019, which means that we have respected our commitments. This system allows more than ever the free flow of aluminum across our border. This free flow is even more important with the entering into force of the new NAFTA in a few days. This agreement, the new NAFTA, ensures that at least 70% of aluminum be used in North America, in the three countries, Mexico, the US, and Canada, in the automotive industry. This is an even greater reason to ensure that aluminum considers to flow across the border. These rules are also good for the competitiveness of industries in both countries, particularly for the defense industry, the automotive industry. It's good then for workers and for consumers. We'll continue to have our opinion heard by the American administration to ensure that this good relationship may continue.
On a separate subject, you know that there are credible legal voices saying the government can intervene in the Meng Wanzhou case. How many years are we willing to let this drag through the courts here in Canada?
Well, we understand and we feel and we not only share but are very upset with with the situation that the two Michaels are going through in China for too long. We have, and the Prime Minister has made that very clear once again yesterday, we have led the Chinese government that this is totally unacceptable. And we believe that our anger and frustration are also shared by many other partners outside of Canada, and some of them have voiced also the level of anger and frustration. And I think this is something absolutely essential. Now, this being said, in Canada, we have not only a tradition, but a responsibility to work in a manner that is supportive of the integrity and the independence of our justice system. This is very important for the way in which our institutions work in Canada. We have a separation between the executive, and the legislative, as well as the judicial systems, and that's exactly what it should be. We also have a reputation to defend outside of our borders if we want to maintain the ability of other partners to defend us in those very upsetting circumstances that the two Michaels are living through.
Thank you, Minister. We'll take one last question on the phone and one last question from the room, but we'll start on the phone. Operator, over to you.
Thank you. Merci. Our next question, notre prochaine question nous vient de Émilie Bergeron avec l'agence QMI. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Émilie Bergeron, QMI Agency. Question. Mr. Duclos, with regard to the possible tariffs being imposed on aluminum once again, you're ready to react? Are you ready to react to this possibility? Minister Freeland has a declaration ready. Is that because the threat of tariffs is real? What are you hearing? Is what Bloomberg is reporting truly a possibility? Answer. We've known for some time now that the U.S. has not only protectionist attitudes, but measures. The work of Mr. Freeland and Mr. Trudeau has been to fight against this. We've had to face the music, however. We signed a new agreement, the new NAFTA. We eliminated about 1 year ago the tariffs imposed on steel and aluminum. So despite this environment, this very complex environment, we've been able to protect the interests of Canadian workers in many respects. We won't hide, however, the fact that there is this protectionist threat. It still exists. It is probably more serious in this current context that many countries around the world are facing, this current health context. So we're taking this threat seriously. We have to regularly remind our neighbors and our other economic partners of the importance of working together. When we work together, when we listen to each other, when we know that the rules are properly applied, we allow the industries in the respective countries to be productive and become prosperous.
Are aware of the protectionist attitudes and actions of the last few years in the context of our relationship with the United States. We did, however, work really well, and that certainly is in large part due to the work of Minister Freeland and Prime Minister Trudeau in addressing those threats from, in particular, our southern neighbor. And we have come to a new NAFTA. We've also lifted about a year ago the unfair and illegal aluminum tariffs and aluminum and steel tariffs that were imposed under their Section 232. This being said, we need as Canadians to be mindful of the fact that protectionism still exists and in fact runs the risk of being even bigger and being an even greater threat as we emerge from the COVID health and economic crisis. This being said, we use every opportunity to make our neighbors and friends and trade partners understand that it is to the joint benefit of everyone to keep the flow of goods and services open and strong, because we all gain from that. Our businesses become and remain more competitive if we succeed in decreasing the barriers that could be imposed under protectionist views.
Emilie, en suivi?
Oui, bien sûr.
Follow-up question? All right, I'm just trying to understand. We understand that this protectionist threat is not something new. Are you able to confirm, however, today that the Trump administration is considering imposing these tariffs? That there is a tangible possibility that there will be an announcement on Friday? Answer, follow-up answer. Well, there's always a diversity of opinions. It would be quite natural that within the administration to the south of us, there may be voices that prone a return to protectionism. Whether this is actually the case, the Canadian government is always required to protect the interests of its workers as a precautionary measure. We are going to continue to work together for the benefit of our businesses and our workers. Thank you, Minister.
Michael Couture from Global National. Minister Duclos, the question's for you. If you say that the Canadian government has been monitoring the flow and making sure that there is no dumping of steel into Canada and then thereby sort of angering the Americans, why is the U.S. talking about a 10% tariff on aluminum if Canada has supposed to be monitoring this?
Thank you. Those monitoring and regulatory activities and resources have been put into place starting September 1st, 2019. So a few months ago, they have been effective. And we, given that this is the case, Minister Freeland and Prime Minister Trudeau are using every opportunity and will keep doing so to to engage with our American partners to make sure that the result and the positive result of those regulations and activities are well understood by all involved partners in the U.S. But that's a large number of partners, and some of them may not have perhaps fully followed the application and the usefulness of those activities and resources. So if there is a level of uncertainty, Minister Freeland and Prime Minister Trudeau will certainly make sure that it is clarified, that we keep maintaining that excellent and mutually positive and beneficial relationship that we've developed on that particular file over the last few months.
Just as a follow-up, the last time this happened, one of the ways that the Canadian government responded was tariffs on American products to the tune of $16.6 billion. There was things such as Kentucky bourbon, playing cards. If I'm not mistaken, you can correct me if I'm wrong, in the latest USMCA, we don't seem to have that leverage because we're only allowed to impose tariffs on something on aluminum, in this case, if they apply them to Canada. So what kind of leverage do we have in trying to fight this possibility of 10% tariffs on aluminum if we don't have the ability to strike them back at other products? Do we have the ability to delay US CS CUSMA or USMCA coming to effect before July 1st as leverage to prevent them from doing this to us?
Well, the short answer to this question is that we will always defend the interests of aluminum workers using all the tools that are available. Now, the tools that we have now are very substantial. We have a new NAFTA, which is going to take effect in a few days from now, which is going to make it even more important that the flow of aluminum is maintained to continue building a stronger automobile industry on both sides of the borders. We have also an enforcement mechanism, a monetary mechanism that is working really well, which is, I believe, reassuring a large number of partners in the U.S. and will continue to do exactly that, not to keep insisting on defending our workers while reminding everyone that this is to the benefit of all workers on both sides of the frontiers. And in doing this, we will always be open to and certainly eventually be able to use all possible options.
Thank you, Minister. Ceci met fin à la conférence de presse. That's it for today. Thank you.